Speaking for my companions and myself, I can categorically state that we were in no mood for any joviality with Jerry. We hated his guts. We were bent on his destruction at each and every opportunity. Our greatest wish was to be granted an enemy target worthy of our Vickers machine gun.
We were under shell fire for 8 hours. It was like a dream. Some of the men looked quite insane after the charge. As we entered the German trenches, a great number came out asking for mercy. Needless to say, they were shot right off. The Royal Scots took about 300 prisoners and immediately shot the whole lot.
There were many cases on both sides of prisoners being killed after surrender. Such atrocities fueled hatred further. But many prisoners were captured. They provided excellent opportunities for propaganda. British newsreel film of German POWs was used to convince audiences back home that Britain was gaining the upper hand. By the end of the war, there were nearly 9 million prisoners in total, and captivity was not their only hardship.
It's already been 2 years since you were here last, and Mother Nature needs to fulfill her urges again. As you can't come and see me, I'm forced to go looking elsewhere. Don't think I'm joking, I'm serious. I don't care what you think of me, but you can't expect me to waste my youth like this. After all, I'm not made of wood, and what a person needs, a person must get. Please don't be cross with me, will you? Your ever-loving Thelma. Your sweet children send you lots of love.
Another German wife was careful to reassure her absent husband.
We've got a real slut in our house who's always got someone new with her. That bitch isn't good enough for such a decent man. The poor thing fights at the front, while she swans off to the cinema and the pub with the other fellas back home. Dearest man, please don't think evil thoughts, because there are also good women who are faithful to their men.
Letters from home were the soldier's lifeline. German troops were offered these beguiling colour postcards to reassure loved ones that they were comfortable, happy and safe. But news from the front was rarely so cosy. A German factory worker, learning that her husband had been killed, wrote to her boss to resign.
My beloved husband worked here for years, and I did the same work with his tools, and I was proud that while he was fighting at the front, I could represent him here. It was not always pleasant in the factory, but my husband's letters gave me courage. And so, until his death, the job was sacrosanct to me. That's why I can't do it anymore.
More and more women in Germany, France and Britain were making munitions. Many men were contemptuous of women's abilities to do their jobs, and fearful that if they managed it, the women might not clear off after the war. Jeannie Riley wrote to her husband at the front about her new job.
We were told that the amount of work we do in 3 weeks would have taken the men 3 years. And Jamie, the men are getting quite mad at us. One woman I work with, well, she lost her finger in a machine in the works. But she's a tough one. When she came back from the Western Infirmary, she carried on like nothing had happened. have to get up at 4:30 every morning. So I'll have you up at the same time when you come home, if God spares you.
Jeannie's husband, Jamie, did come safely home. The most important battle Jeannie Riley and her colleagues were working towards in 1916 was the Somme. It's now a byword for wholesale suffering and slaughter, but its architect, General Sir Henry Rawlinson, conceived it as an offensive with limited objectives, more dependent on guns than manpower.
With plenty of guns and ammunition, we ought to be able to avoid the heavy losses which the infantry have always suffered on previous occasions.
The French were due to play the lead role, but with Verdun dragging on, the British bore the brunt. And there was intense political pressure to deliver a victory. General Sir Douglas Haig was the British Army's commander-in-chief. He turned Rawlinson's plan into a major offensive. When the British guns opened up on the Somme on the 24th of June 1916, the windows rattled in London 160 miles away. But after 7 days of bombardment, the British artillery had neither silenced the German guns nor destroyed their defences. A sergeant of the Tyneside Irish went over the top on the 1st of July, with lines of men on either side of him.
I heard the patter-patter of machine guns in the distance. By the time I'd gone another 10 yards, there seemed to be only a few men left around me. By the time I'd gone another 20 yards, I seemed to be on my own. Then I was hit myself.
Farmers around the Somme still gather a harvest of iron for the French army to collect and defuse. In this war, what happened in the factory directly affected the outcome on the battlefield. 30% of British shells fired on the Somme were duds, a drastic failure of quality control. But the key factor was that there weren't enough heavy guns, and British artillery wasn't much good. On that terrible first day, it became clear that the French knew what they were doing, and the British did not.
The French artillery, in their attacks, did not shoot the ground to bits before they moved over it. A short, intense bombardment, followed by a rush of men, gave them the position clean and intact. We would shoot our ground into a quagmire and then send troops slowly forward over it and expect them to provide their own cover from the enemy's retaliation.
On the 1st of July, the French gained all their objectives at a cost of a few thousand men. Britain achieved virtually nothing, with casualties of 57,470. It was the heaviest loss suffered in a single day by the British Army in its entire history. There had been a host of lessons for both sides since 1914, and the British became avid learners. How to lay down shell fire over the heads of advancing men. How to locate enemy guns using flash spotting, sound ranging, and trigonometry. And how to knock them out. Better shells, better fuses, better guns and better gunners. While the Germans came to rely more on skilled infantrymen, often acting on their own initiative, the British concentrated on fighting a technical war. It was all too late for the Somme. Haig must bear the responsibility for not stopping the slaughter when the breakthrough failed. The battle petered out in November 1916, with around 500,000 casualties on each side. Cambrai in northern France. On the 20th of November 1917, the site of the first major use of tanks in the world. Here, the British Army would put what they had learned into practice. Britain's invention of the tank cracked a key First World War problem: how to combine firepower and movement. Tanks needed dry, hard ground. They got it at Cambrai. The attack was led by a general from the front.
A lithe figure strode up, pipe aglow, ash stick under his arm. Unexpected, it was General Ellis. "I'm going over in this tank," he announced, tapping Hilda. I swung the door open, and he squeezed through inside.
The artillery now knew not to chew up the ground ahead. A short, sharp bombardment, and then over 300 tanks rolled into the first light.
Just before 6:30 a.m. the barrage commenced, and we started off. Our first bump came fairly soon. We climbed a bank, crashed through a hedge, and came down heavily on the other side. We were thrown about like so many peanuts, and we had to clutch on to whatever we could.
The tanks, looking like giant toads, became visible against the skyline. Some of the leading tanks carried huge bundles of tightly bound brushwood, which they dropped into the wide German trenches, then crossed over them. It was broad daylight as we crossed no man's land and the German front line. I saw very few wounded coming back and a few German prisoners. The enemy wire had been dragged about like old curtains. The tanks appeared to have busted through.
The tanks, still experimental, were part of one of the most sophisticated, innovative plans of the war. The aim was to break through the German lines with minimal loss of life. The artillery would use their new skills and technology to locate and target the German batteries before the battle. The tanks would punch a hole in the German lines, with the infantry tucked up close for mutual protection, while the cavalry pushed through.